Hey everyone, it's Lumi and welcome back for part 2 of my Live2D rigging series. Today I'm going to go over how to rig the eyes on my new Live2D model. Honestly, it's the most fun part for me. Rigging the eyes is also a great way to show you a whole bunch of different tools in Live2D, as well as a brief overview on how physics works. Making the eyes move requires a lot of different parts, but honestly, what we really need the most is the top eyelid, bottom eyelid, the iris, which is the color part, and the eye white. You could always separate that into extra parts like the eyelashes, eyeshadow, the eye crease. And if you want to give the eyes a really sparkly, bouncy look, you can always separate the eye shine into their separate parts as well. All right, let's head into Live2D and start setting up all of our parts. Let's start by taking a brief moment to look over the windows and tools in Live2D that we will be using as we rig the eyes. As seen previously, this is the Deformer window, and this is where we will see a list of all our parts and warp deformers, all the animations and transformations that we have currently applied to our model. Below over here is the Parts window, and this is where you get to see all of your layers and folders as you would in your drawing software. If you want to hide a certain layer or part or even just a whole folder, you can do so by clicking on this little eye icon, for example, on the hair here. And now all of those parts are hidden. Hiding parts is really great because sometimes you need more visibility to animate certain details. And I don't know, maybe the hair's in the way or a huge piece of your model is just like not where you need it to be right now. By clicking the little eye icon again, you'll just be turning the visibility back on and no one would be the wiser. However, it's important to note if you try to hide the visibility of a warp deformer, all you're doing is hiding the box and not the actual part itself. Having everything organized into different warp deformers can be really fun and convenient as you start to animate the bigger pieces. For example, I've set everything into a whole body warp deformer, so if I move that around, it's the whole body, but then I can also have it move just the head on its own, or maybe just the hair. The first tool we'll be looking at is the one for art meshes. Art meshes helps the program know how and where to bend your flat image parts. One of the ways we can do this is using the automatic art mesh generator. There's a few settings that you can choose from, and it basically just predetermines where the points would be based on your object shape. So you can either have your dots spaced out or much closer together. Where you need the points is up to you. You can also play around with the settings and make your own presets for automatic mesh generation. Another tool would be the manual mesh edit. This is where you can go in and actually draw in the mesh points yourself. Once you're in mesh edit mode, you have a whole bunch of tools that are available to you. You can find them over here in the tool details window. Some of these tools include an eraser so that you can manually erase certain mesh points. There's also this neat little pen tool that automatically adds and connects mesh points for you. The pen icon with the plus is for adding mesh points, so you can draw them along yourself. There's the same little button next to it with the minus, and that one is for removing mesh points. And there is also the option to automatically generate a mesh from within this mode. Once a mesh is made, make sure it's fully closed and all around your part. Otherwise, once you leave this mode, some of your textures won't show up anymore. Once your art mesh is made, you can start moving and bending your image however you like. One way to do this is with the selection tool. And while you can move the whole part using this tool, you can also pick and choose individual mesh points. Another tool I like using is the brush tool, and this is a great way to nudge and squeeze in little areas of your mesh as you animate it. A few other options for selecting mesh points would be the lasso tool, where you can just draw around the points that you want to pick and choose, as well as the brush selection tool, where you can just draw over your mesh and it highlights the points for you. Another fun tool is the art path tool. This allows you to draw a line with dots, so it's kind of like jointing your mesh. And again, using the selection tool, you can move these points around however you want. By the way, don't ever be afraid to hit Ctrl Z and undo any kind of movement if ever you feel like you made a mistake or it's not quite right. Last but not least, this is a handy and optional tip. I like setting a few keyboard shortcuts for two different things. One is so that I can hide the selection box, so that would be your warp deformer or if you select a whole bunch of layers at once. Sometimes it just gets in the way, so I like being able to hide it. You can hide it by pressing the X button. However, it's easier for me if I just have a keyboard shortcut. A second shortcut I like to set up on my keyboard is a hide shortcut, and this is just to hide the selection. I can still move my parts around, but it hides the meshes and all the other lines and things. Sometimes those two get in the way. All right, let's start bringing these eyes to life. First, I'm going to separate the parts for the left eye from the right eye into their own individual warp deformers, and this is honestly so we don't mix everything up. Next, I'm going to start making the art meshes for all the individual parts. For the eyelids and lashes, I like to draw my own mesh. I usually do that by drawing a line all the way down the middle, and then I'll frame the outside. And just for good measure, I also like to add a little margin, like a border around the outside. The eyes move and blink a lot, and this is one of the parts that people notice the most on a VTuber model, so I like to make sure I have enough mesh points to keep it fluid and bendy. Once the outline and general shape of my mesh points has been made, I'm going to press the auto connect tool here, and it's going to turn all those like blue semi-transparent lines into more solid lines, making the connection for me. This way I don't have to actually connect all of the dots one by one. Now we're going to repeat the process for the top eyelashes and a few of the other meshes. The eye crease is a really small part, so I'm just going to do a lot of mesh points all the way down and a border just to keep it closed together. Some of the smaller parts I won't be bending and manipulating as much, so automatic mesh generation is really convenient here. The iris and eye white, however, I do prefer drawing the meshes myself. These are parts that move around a little bit more. Once my art meshes have been made, I'm going to add a few art paths to the eyelids. This is because I'm going to be bending them as they open and close. I usually do this by making a point at one end and then the other, and then I'll fill the spaces in. Art paths curve automatically, but the top eyelid has a very sharp angled eyelash. Using this tool here is going to straighten that line for me. That way I won't have any weird awkward bends when I start the movement. I'm also going to add an art path to the eye white, and this will be really convenient later when the eye is like in a more closed position. Let's start looking at the parameters. For starters, I'm animating the left eye, so it's important that I remember to pick the parameters that say L for left. Keep in mind, this is the left eye as it would be on her face and not left on the side of the screen. By default, the EyeOpen parameter has two settings, so it's either at 0 for closed or 1 for open. I like making the eyes have a little surprised, wide-eyed look. So what you can do is you can right-click and edit your parameter, and I'm going to change the maximum value to 2. Once this has been done, we're going to press on this little icon with the 3 dots here, and this will automatically add 3 keyforms to my parameter. So 1 on either side and 1 in the middle. The middle position is when the eye is open normally. So that one we will not be touching. The 0 position is for when the eye is closed, and 2 is when it's surprised. However, to make sure that I've got some more fluid animation, I like to add extra points along the way. So I'm going to add a keyform at 0.8, which is going to be the same thing, still open normally. And then I'm also going to add a keyform at 0.6, and this is convenient for if you do like the squinty, shifty eye. Motion tracking and facial tracking is amazing, and it really depends on what technology you have, but adding these extra keyforms helps keep it a little more fluid and you don't get the snappy eye open close. Down here in the bottom left, by clicking on the camera snapshot button, this will overlay a semi-transparent image of what my model looks like now. This is really great when you're moving parts so that you can have an idea of what your point of origin is without having to move back and forth between your keyforms. So we're just going to start by moving the eyelid down a tiny little bit since we're just squinting and not fully closing the eye. You can also press this little button down here to turn off your snapshot overlay if you need a better view of where your parts are at the moment. So I'm going to add keyforms to all my other parts and start moving them into position to match that top eyelid. If you start moving parts without making a keyform, that part's basically just going to consider that its new permanent home. So now that we've made a sort of semi-closed squinty eye, we can start closing the eye more. I'm going to add a keyform at 0.2 instead of going straight to 0. And again, this is to avoid that super snappy open-closed animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the eyelid down a little bit more. Not fully closed, but very close to the center of the eye. And the bottom lids we're going to bring up in a similar way. As we move the eye open and close, you don't want to deal with the iris too much and like bend or misshape it. So what you can do is you can have it clip as a mask to the eye white. This way, if the eyes kind of like overflow as you look left and right, or as they close, it won't stick out from behind your eyelids. Now we're going to shrink the eye white down to this almost closed position. A quick way for me to do this is I will grab one of the points on this transformation box, either at the top and the bottom. I will hold the Alt key, and this will make sure that it transforms evenly, and I'll just kind of like squish it down. Then, because the eyelids and eyelashes are in a curved shape, this is where the path comes in handy. I just start moving the points on my art path to make the eye white fit into place, and I move individual mesh points with the selection tool as needed. And once all of my parts are in position, it's time to actually close the eye, go into the 0 position, and just close that small gap. It's okay to take a moment to open and close the eye to look at it in all the positions. Fine-tuning can happen at any point during the creation process. Now that we've closed the eye, it's time to make her open them wide and be a little more surprised. No extra keyforms here, we're just going to slide it all the way to the 2.0. And we're going to move everything up or wider just a little bit. One last final touch for our eye open and close parameter will actually be applied to the iris instead of the eyelashes. On all of the iris parts, we're going to add the same keyforms to the EyeOpen parameter. And starting with the eyes wide open, we're just going to shrink the iris down a teeny little bit. This is for that exaggerated cartoon and anime shocked look. Once we've done that, we're going to go to the almost closed position, so 0.2, and this time we'll do the reverse. We'll make the eyes a little more open. Same again for the eyes closed. We're going to try and match it to about the same thing as 0.2, maybe slightly bigger. And if we want smoother easing, maybe on 0.6 keyframe, we'll just make it like not really much bigger, but a tad more than neutral. Small details like this add a lot of expressiveness to our character's eyes. Now that we've got our eye open and close animation ready to go, we're going to add a new parameter to these eyes. The eye smile parameter is a great way to add a little more life to your character's eyes. When we smile with our eyes, so we're going to do the same thing with our VTuber's eyes. I'm going to start by going into the Deformer window and selecting all the bottom eyelash and eyelid parts, as well as the eye white and the bottom eyeshadow. Then over here in the parameters window, I'm going to add 2 keyforms to the IL smile. And by sliding it all the way to 1, that's how the program knows that the eye smile is active. So 0, you're not smiling, 1, you're smiling. Then using the brush tool, we're just going to nudge that bottom eyelid up a little bit. Give it a little squish just like this. Once that's done, we're going to add the eye smile parameter to the top eye parts as well. So the top lid, the eyeshadow, and the crease. And we're just going to gently bring the eyelid in on the outer corner of the eye. You don't want to squish it too much. A subtle change goes a long way here. Once that is done, we're actually going to have to repeat the process and make the eye smile on all the open and close keyforms. The 1.0 and the 0.8 keyforms are the same thing. It's the neutral eye open. So what we can do is we will go with the eye smile parameter on and go to our normal default eye open parameter. Select all of the parts that we've added the smile to and press Ctrl-Shift-C. What this does is it copies your parts and your mesh points exactly as it is in that key of your parameters. Then we're going to go over to 0.8, press Ctrl-Shift-V, and now we don't have to redo that. The program's done the work for us. I'm going to repeat the process one more time. Once that's done, we're going to slide on over to the 0.6 key of our eye open, making sure the eye smile parameter is still on. And again, we're going to nudge up the bottom eyelid and tilt in the corner of the topper eyelid as well. We're going to continue this again once we get to the 0.2 eye open close parameter. Lastly is the fully closed position, and this is the keyform that'll differ the most from the others in the eye smile parameters. What we're going to do is we're going to tilt the eyelid in a more N shape instead of a U shape. Give it that smiley look when the eyes are closed instead of just a neutral closed. And once that is complete, all that's left is going back to the eye surprised wide open look. And you know what? You can be surprised and happy as well. Now that we've animated our eye open and eye close parameters, which is mostly the eyelids and lashes, it's time to animate the eyeball itself. So we're talking about the eyeball X and eyeball Y parameter, which is you're looking left and right or up and down. For this, we won't need to touch the eye white part itself. However, we will need to put all of the iris, shine, pupil into its own deformer. So I'll start by making a new warp deformer called eyeball X. On the eyeball X parameter, we're going to add 3 keyforms, and then by sliding the keyform all the way to the right, if you want to make sure that your part moves in a straight line and it doesn't accidentally end up slightly off angle, hold the shift key while sliding your part over. It's okay if it looks a little far. The actual eye tracking itself won't capture your eye moving that far, but it gives you a lot more freedom in your range of movement. We'll repeat the same thing for the left side of the X parameter, so we can bring the eye all the way over that way as well. Now, there's 2 different ways you can add the eyeball Y parameter. You can either make a separate deformer underneath, so within your eyeball X, reselect all of your iris parts again, make an eyeball Y warp deformer. Once your eyeball Y warp deformer is made, you can add your 3 keyforms onto the eyeball Y parameter and repeat the process. This is a quick way to get both your left, right, up, down movement without having to deal with your angles and corners. However, I personally find that it kind of brings the eye too far into the corner and I want a little bit more control. I will be removing the eyeball Y warp deformer. I'll instead turn my eyeball X into an XY deformer by adding that second parameter to it, rigging the up and down on the eyeball Y over here. And once that is ready, as you can see, the corners, it's not moving into the corners as it should. So we will select our 2 parameters, the eyeball X and Y, open the parameter menu here, and there is an option called Synthesize Corners. What this does is the program will kind of auto-generate placement for where it thinks the parts should be within the corners. This works pretty well with simple shapes. So now that my eyeball is set and the corners are ready to go, I'm just going to fine tune it and bring it down a little bit so that it kind of feels slightly more natural within the eye itself. Another tiny detail that I like adding is moving the eye shine a little bit based on the XY position of the eyeball. And it's really just a tiny gentle nudge. So on these 3 white shiny parts, I'm going to add an eyeball X and Y parameter with 3 keyforms to each. And just depending on where the eyeball itself is positioned, I might nudge these shines over a teeny tiny bit. So technically with this, our eyeball is done and it's rigged and ready to go. However, let's be real, everyone likes the bouncy physics. I'm going to show you a few basic things you can do to add some physics to your eyes. This involves creating a few parameters. I'm going to make a whole bunch of parameters here. Just make sure that you give all of these new parameters a name and an ID so you can tell them apart. I set them at -30 as the minimum, 0 for default, and +30 for the maximum. So once all of my parameters are created, I'm going to go back and take my eyeball, so the iris, and on top of the eyeball X and Y, I'm going to create a new warp deformer to contain all of that together. I will be calling it eyeball jiggle X. This is when the eyeball itself kind of wiggles around. Once that warp deformer is made, I'm going to add 3 keyforms to the eyeball jiggle X. We're going to widen it a little when it's all the way to the right, and we're just going to squish it in a tiny little bit when it's all the way to the left. You really don't need to move it around that much to achieve that bouncy squishy look. When it comes to physics, I don't add everything to the same warp deformer. I like nesting things underneath. So we're going to go back down to the eyeball XY warp deformer, create a new warp with that. And what that's going to do is it's going to add a certain hierarchy to the eyeball physics. So the eyeball X jiggle will contain the eyeball Y jiggle, which will contain the actual eye left and right movement. So same thing for the eyeball Y jiggle warp deformer. We're going to add 3 keyforms to that parameter, and we're going to give it a nice little squishy look up and down. Repeating the same steps again here, the pupil will get 2 warp deformers, one for the jiggle X and another one for the jiggle Y. We're going to give that more squishy animation. Next, we're going to do some of the eyelash wiggling. So for the eyelash wiggle X, when it's all the way to the right, that's when it's kind of like extended, and moving the parameter to the opposite keyform, this is when the eyelashes kind of like wiggle in towards the center of the face. For the bottom eyelashes, we can repeat the process. Lastly, we're going to add a whole bunch of warp deformers for the eye shine physics. So all of the eye shine parts are going to be nested with a shine jiggle X and a shine jiggle Y warp deformer separately. We'll add 3 keyforms to each of those parameters, and we'll just squish them in and out, up and down. And lastly, let's add one other parameter. We're going to add a shine jiggle R for rotation. This is for that really bouncy extra wiggle for the physics. Totally optional, but sometimes I think it looks fun. Within the deformer for the shine jiggle R, when we actually start rotating these parts, we don't want to move them too much. Just a tiny bit of rotation should be more than enough to achieve the look we are aiming for. Okay, so our eye open and close animation is done, the eyeball X and Y as well, and we have a whole bunch of parameters for physics, but how do we know if it works? How do we set it up? Before we pop into the physics preview window, we're going to add the automatic eye blinking. In the Live2D menu, go into Modeling, Parameter, and there should be an option for setting eye blinking and lip sync. In the pop-up window, just check off your eye, L, and R open parameters, and that should automatically set the blinking for your model. Now let's pop over into the physics setting window. So again, let's click on Modeling in the menu, and all the way at the bottom, Physics Setting, and that will pop open a completely different window. This is the physics window, and this is basically what determines the movement, the bounce, the sway of all of your animation. It's a way to add a finishing touch to everything. There's a whole bunch of parameters, sliders, and options to choose from, and it might seem confusing, but we're going to look at just what we need for the eye physics itself. Already, as we can see, the character is blinking automatically. We are going to start by creating a new physics group. So over here, we will press the Add button, and we are going to name this Eyeball Jiggle. A very brief and simple way to explain what physics is for a Live2D model is more or less that when one part moves, maybe another part moves with it. Like if I move my head, then the hair is going to move with my model. Or maybe if I move my eyebrows up, my own ears move up and down with it. For the eyeball jiggle, what we are going to do is in the input window here, we are going to add the eye open for the left and right. And then the type of input, we're going to leave it at position, and the effectiveness we'll put at 50 for each. So like half and half shared. What this means is the program is going to add some physics and animation based on when the eyes open and close. For example, when we blink. Next, we need to set the pendulum, and that's kind of like, I guess, the swinging rope or the chain reaction to the movement itself. There's a whole bunch of different settings in here, but for the most part, you can either explore and play around with them or use some of the presets. For the eye physics animation here, we could probably get away with a preset. I'll just be importing the hair double pendulum preset here, and that should add 2 movement points automatically. This is more than enough for what we need. Next, we're going to go into the output settings. This determines what is going to move when our eyes move open and closed. So like when I blink, what part of the eye jiggle do I want to happen? By pressing Add, I'm going to select the Eyeball Jiggle X and Eyeball Jiggle Y parameters. As you can see, the character blinks though, and it's not moving very much. If you press the Increase Output button, however, it's going to max out the output of these parameters at 100, and oh boy, is there some wiggle going on. If ever you feel like the output and the results are a little too intense with your physics, you can always manually adjust the scale by putting in numbers that work best for what you're trying to achieve. I don't particularly want to add a separate physics group for the eye pupil since it's a similar type of jiggle, so I'll be adding those parameters here as well underneath. And again, I'm going to downscale the output because it's bouncing around a little too much there. Once the eyeball jiggle looks good, let's add some eyelash wiggling. Again, we're creating a new group, calling it Eyelash Jiggle. We will be importing our eye open parameters for left and right. This time though, I'm going to turn down the effectiveness. Eyelashes are much more noticeable when they wiggle. Import a double pendulum and add your eyelash X and Y jiggle parameters. adjusting the scale and output as needed. We're also going to make another group for the shine jiggle. We're again going to be adding our EyeOpen left and right, and this time we will be making a triple pendulum since we have 3 parts that we want to move. Then we import our shine physics parameters into the output section. One final physics group that we can add is for the eyeball position itself. So when the eye is looking left and right or up and down, just add a tiny bit of bounce to the eye as it moves if it stops when you look somewhere. I'm just going to call this one eyeball jiggle physics. In the input settings, this time we are going to do eyeball X and eyeball Y instead of open and close. Once again, importing a double pendulum, and we're just going to turn down the scale a lot more for this movement than we would for the blinking jiggle. We want it to be really subtle. So as you can see here, as I click and drag the eye around and have her look, it has a teeny tiny little bounce back. And with that, technically our eye is done. Now let's rig the next one. Just kidding. We're gonna copy and paste that. Start off by selecting all of the parts for your left eye. This includes the parts and layers themselves and all of the warp deformers. Press Ctrl C to copy the objects, and then Ctrl V to paste them. Once you've pasted a copy of your eye, we're going to do a little magic trick. Right-click on it and select Reflect. And what that's going to do is it's just going to mirror all of those parts to the other side. This is why using a symmetry tool in your drawing program is very handy, or making sure your model is centered in the file, because otherwise things won't reflect evenly and your character will look lopsided. When reflecting your parts, just make sure you check off the box that says reflect horizontally. And the only parameter I think we're going to flip is the eyeball X, because otherwise you're going to end up with this weird cross-eyed look if you don't flip that parameter. Okay, and now that my parts are flipped, I'm just going to rename all these copies to R for right instead of L for left, because again, I'm just going to confuse myself later on. And now that all of my parts are renamed, we can just go and delete the original layers for the right eye. Selecting it all and delete. Okay, and there we have it. The eyes are officially done. They blink, they move, and they bounce. As always, rigging eyes is still my favorite part when making a new model, and I hope you guys had fun too. This was a long video with a lot of things to cover, but the next one's going to be much shorter. In the next video, we will be rigging eyebrows. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye bye!